Hi, great to see you here today in Hong Kong. I've got to say Hong Kong is probably one of my favorite cities in the world for a variety of different reasons. Not only is it the financial hub of Asia, but when I think of Hong Kong, and I'm sure most would think alike, I think of a city, an economy that's vibrant, that's dynamic, that's future-looking. So it's probably more than just a little bit serendipitous that I'm here today talking to you about the future state of the investment industry. How appropriate is that? Now, I don't know about you, but have you ever had one of those moments where you just get it? Have you ever had one of those moments? I had one just recently that I'll share with you now. I was in San Francisco checking out of my Airbnb, as one does. Had just called Uber on my cell phone, watching the progress on Google Maps as Uber found its way towards me, jumping on board, taking the opportunity to check emails, do a little bit of banking before I arrived at the airport, getting to the airport and experiencing a totally automated check-in process, going through immigrations, again, facial recognition, totally automated. And then going into the departure lounge, going to get something to eat at McDonald's, everything, again, totally automated. There was no human interaction. And it was at that moment of time that I realized, you know what, things have changed. This wasn't Kansas anymore. This seemed like something, you know, that we wouldn't have imagined not that many years ago, 10 years ago. But these are all changes that represent the disruptions that are taking place across so many different sectors. Finance, of course, being one of those. And if you think we've been through a lot of change up till now in the last 10 years, fast forward the next 5 years, the rate of change is going to become even more accentuated. If you look on the near-term horizon, what can we expect in 5 years' time? Well, we can expect practical quantum computers within 5 years. And I don't know if you have any understanding of quantum computers. I've only just really found out more about it myself recently. But they will totally advance and disrupt computing that will unleash untold power for unimaginable things in coming years. You'll have self-driving trucks. 5 years from now, you'll see convoys of trucks going down the motorways, potentially without drivers. That's disruptive when you consider in the United States that roughly 5% of the workforce are truck drivers, but that's a topic for a different time. You'll have cell mapping of every cell in our entire body, which amounts to about 37.5 trillion cells that will be mapped for untold benefit in terms of therapies, in terms of advanced medicines. This is within 5 years. You'll also have brain implants that potentially will be able to take paralyzed individuals and enable them to be mobile again. This is what's ahead of us in the coming 5 years. And beyond that, who knows? The rate of change, the rate of advancement is picking up speed so quickly. Now, you've probably heard the Chinese proverb, "May you live in interesting times." Now, depending on your point of view, that can be taken one of two ways. It can be taken as a threat, or it can be taken as an opportunity. Well, let me say that those of us in the finance sector are certainly living through interesting times. It's upon us to decide whether we take it as a threat or whether we take it as an opportunity. But the reality is this, is that it would be a very naive view that we somehow as a sector are going to avoid all the changing taking place all around us. So we need to come to terms with this. We need to come to grips with all of the change that is taking place. And it's not as if change and disruption is unheard of in financial services. Think about it. It was in the late 50s, 60s when credit cards were introduced. Again in the 60s when ATMs were introduced. Do you remember that? Some of you certainly would. You know, with the advent of ATMs, you know, it was predicted at the time that there would be no more branching operations within years. We had, in the 1980s, we had FPOS, debit cards. And more recently, we've had Bitcoin, we've had robo-advice solutions, any number of advances. But here we are, we're adapting. Because that's what we really do good as a sector, we adapt. We get on with getting on. What does the future look like? Well, CFA Institute has done a recent study that has polled industry leaders right across the industry. The study looks at the future state of the investment industry. And here's some of the interesting facts that they've found. 85% believe that in coming years the industry will consolidate. 70% believe that there will be an increased focus on passive investments. 60% believe that there will be more in-source work done to minimize costs. 50% believe that margins will shrink dramatically. Okay, so what's the good news? 65% of the respondents believe that globalization is actually going to be a good thing, is going to open up new markets. 60% of the respondents look at fintech, at advances in technology, as being a good thing as well. The glass half full. With the advances in technology, we will be able to reach out to hitherto unreachable segments of the population who have not invested wisely, who have not taken advantage of financial advice. 70% look at Asia as increasingly becoming important as a financial hub of the world. That's the good news. And here's a couple of other interesting facts. Fact one, economic development is reliant upon fair and efficient, transparent capital markets. Fact two, those capital markets thrive, are dependent on that person-to-person interchange. Fact number three, that person-to-person interchange is a relationship based on trust, an increasingly important value placed on establishing that trustful relationship. Okay, so where does that take us in the conversation? Well, it seems pretty clear that the industry is undergoing some fundamental changes, and that where there are changes, there's going to be opportunities. It's also clear that we need to move from being an industry to a profession. We need to move to a profession that's based upon trust, the highest ethical standards, and the highest professional competencies. We need to recognize the change that's taking place all around us, the megatrends that are evolving and developing right before our eyes. Thankfully, again, the future state of the investment profession does a great job of mapping the important relationships and the important evolution of the industry, and also some of the megatrends that are taking place. At the core is an evolution that is required in moving us from an industry to a profession. If you think about it, doctors are considered a profession. Lawyers, for some strange reason, are considered a profession. Even accountants. But as financiers, are we considered a true profession? I would argue not. And certainly the perception of the public is not at times the greatest of what we do as a profession or as an industry. So that's a problem that we need to overcome. And again, how are we going to overcome that? We're going to overcome that by rebuilding the trust and confidence in what we do as a sector. So as we move to a profession, trust becomes all the more important. Trust adds that additional value. That changes the value proposition by incorporating ethical behavior and professional standards. So what's required in building a reputation based on trust and the highest ethical behavior and professional standards? Well, in the first instance, it's a relationship based on putting investor interest first, above anything else. It's based on providing objective and independent advice. It's based on providing unconflicted advice. It's based on providing clear and open communication and providing products and services suitable to our investors' needs. But ethical conduct is not one of those things that can be prescribed. Ethics need to emanate from an organization's culture. Ethics need to be part of who we are as professionals. Ethics needs to transcend everything that we're all about. Having the highest ethical behavior, rebuilding that trust. In terms of competencies, competencies entail establishing and maintaining the highest levels of professional standards, of continuing education, of making sure that we as an industry are keeping up with the changes that are taking place all around us, both from a technological and from a regulatory perspective. Making sure that we are up to speed, making sure that we can provide the best service available. Credibility, in turn, requires that we establish and that we maintain the highest professional competencies, that we are up to date with a rapidly evolving technology, that we are up to date with a rapidly evolving regulatory framework, that our investors know that they can turn to us for the best advice that is suitable to their particular circumstances. Okay, so once we move from an industry to a profession by reestablishing that trust and confidence in what we do, what are some of the emerging megatrends that are evolving? There are several megatrends that have been identified as important to our sector going forward. One of them, purposeful capitalism. What that means is that the standard economic performance measures on their own are no longer simply good enough. That as a society, there's greater importance being placed on environmental considerations, on sustainability considerations, on governance considerations, and incorporating measurements that reflect all of those considerations will be important going forward. Lower returns for longer. Face it, guys, we're in a low return environment where we can no longer expect to have the type of returns that we'd become accustomed to. So recognizing that as a new reality and recognizing that as a consequence, we need to adjust our strategies accordingly, that we need to communicate efficiently, that we need to communicate that new reality. Parallel worlds, another megatrend that's been identified by the research. Parallel worlds describes the new reality where one size fits all is no longer good enough. The new millennials particularly are used to having it their way. They're used to bespoke, tailored situations for most everything they do. Financial services and products would be no exception. They have different priorities, and we need to recognize that as an industry, that that's just not good enough to provide one-stop shop, one-size-fits-all going forward. Lastly, of course, digital disruption or digital innovation. That is definitely the new reality that we're facing. So turning that digital innovation, turning digital disruption into a positive, and looking at the opportunities that will present themselves by providing services and products that incorporate new technologies for previously unreachable markets, reaching out to a whole segment of the population that hasn't sought financial advice, reaching out to an entire segment of the population that has inefficiently, inadequately prepared for their futures. Reach out to a hitherto unreachable segment of the population that is not investing wisely. Okay, so to conclude, where does that leave us? Well, I think it's pretty clear at this point that we have some fundamental change and fundamental challenges ahead of us as an industry, or should I say as a profession. Finance professionals and firms need to reevaluate their value proposition. We need to recognize the increasing importance placed on trust, ethical behaviors, and professional competencies as we transition from an industry to a profession. We need to recognize the paradigm shift as we move from a one-size-fits-all solution to adaptive products and services tailored to a changing market. If we do, the change that's all around us will no longer be a threat, but in actual fact, it will be an opportunity that we can all benefit from. Thank you.